Welcome, everybody, to SteeleWatching. My name is Eric.
And I'm Sara.
And today we are discussing Steele in the News.
Woohoo.
Woohoo.
This just in.
I hesitated because I don't actually have the title in my notes here, and I just wanted to make sure I was getting it right. And sorry, having one of those senior moments. Anyway, we are going to be talking about this. This is hang on, I lost the train of thought derailed.
I was going to say, it's not in the station. It's like one of those Thomas the Tank Engine trains, you know?
Steele in the News is the 18th episode of season 1, and it was written by, it first aired on March 4th of 1983, and was written by Michael Gleason, Fred Lyle, and Duncan Smith, from a story originally written by Fred Lyle and Duncan Smith.
Wait. March 4th?
Wait. March 4th?
March 4th,
yes.
You said, is when it aired? Isn't that?
Yes.
Is that today?
No,
or
that was yesterday. That was my wife's birthday.
Okay. Sorry, my brain was like, are you kidding? Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
And if you're listening to this in the future, just totally ignore us, because this date and that date probably has nothing to do with the date you're listening. But anyway.
No, it doesn't.
It was directed by Bert Brinkerhoff. I went with the TV Guide listing on this because it was pretty good. And again, we get all of our episode synopses from Judith Moose's book, Steele Loved After All These Years. She's done an excellent job of cataloging those historical summaries. And so Thank you to Judith. So it goes like this. A saboteur in a TV studio makes the news team look like bumbling fools on the air. But no one is laughing when the weatherman tumbles from the rafters, dead.
It's a pretty good. That is a great summary.
Yes, it is. Very succinct and yet covers pretty much the whole thing.
Yep.
Now, I was hesitant on whether I should mention this or not. And I'll ask you, did you have any external thoughts? I'll call it that. External thoughts while watching this episode.
I have a novel. This is, there are so many thoughts that I had on not just the way that the news is presented, which is obviously the topic of the episode, but the way that the news was presented here in Canada and how it differs from the way the news is presented in the US.
Well, it's because you do it in two languages.
I mean, that should be on a t-shirt. We do it in two languages. Sorry. It's like bankers do it with interest.
Yes. Oh, go back and listen to the old episodes, folks. You get the joke.
Yeah.
Anyway, you were saying what before I interrupted?
Sorry. I felt like, so I did a bit of a deep dive because I was very curious for Canadian media. Our Canadian media is sort of run by the CRTC, which is the Canadian Radio Telecommunications Commission. And essentially that kind of sets the rules on what broadcasts have to have and what kind of content they're allowed to have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of those things that we have to have, it mandates that 35% of all of our programming, whether it's news, fictional, radio, etc., be Canadian. And this was obviously done to prevent, no offense, but the American overwhelm of American media, because our neighbors to the south, we love your TV shows, but it made it very difficult for a lot of Canadian artists to get on TV and on the radio and stuff like that.
Oh, you mean Canadian artists like Bob and Doug McKenzie? What's up, hoser, eh?
I love Bob and Doug. I do love Bob and Doug. But it also affected our news because for the longest time, like the UK, we didn't have a lot of news stations and news programming for the longest time. It was mainly just the CBC. And prior to, say, 1958, the CBC had issued TV licenses to itself for 7 TV stations, 2 in Montreal and 6 major Canadian citizens. Essentially, they were monitoring their competitors. They were able to sort of censor or
Are you saying they abused their position and their authority?
Well, I mean, not really so much as it's more that they're kind of the parent, and all of these other TV stations are kind of like the little kiddies looking up to the CBC for its approval. And but the thing is, the CBC is government funded, so we have a very different approach to the news. And I remember back in the 80s seeing some of the American stations, because we got a lot of Detroit stations and a lot of stations from New York, and it would be like, news at 11, the bees are going to kill us, or news at 11, like, we're about to die. Is your favorite snack causing cancer? Find out it, and I'd be just like, oh my God, everything's awful, like when I'd see those headlines. And ours were very reassuring, like, I'm Peter Mansbridge, and it was just very like different, I guess is the way to put it. So I don't know, I kind of went down that rabbit hole and looked at sort of how American news stations took their approach versus how, and not one for better or worse, but that happy talk format was a real thing.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so
the remnants of it is still with us. Yeah, I mean it's not entirely gone. Yeah. There's still a lot of chattiness in the news. So yeah, I didn't go that.
So what were your thoughts?
I didn't go that way. And so I was curious if you had anything that resembled the same thoughts I had. As I had never thought this before as I watched the show, but doing my notes, doing the rewatch for the podcast specifically, my mind kept going to this place, and I don't know why, because the connection is really
a scary place.
Yes. And my mind. I can go from A to Z and nobody knows how I got there.
No. But you took a left turn at Albuquerque.
Yes. My head kept going to Don Henley, Dirty Laundry. Are you familiar with the song?
Yeah. Lisa Marie Presley actually covered it as well. But yeah.
Well, I knew she did a song called that. I didn't know if it was the same song.
It was a cover. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the lyrics of it just, it's bubble-headed bleach blonde comes on at 5, tell you about the plane crash with a gleam in her eye. It's all about it. It has so many parallels to this episode, at least in my mind, for some reason. And like I said, it's really not a direct tie between that song and this episode.
Yeah.
But my thought kept going there. And so on an impulse, I did a little bit of research, and I found something that was a little bit curious. And
okay,
I don't want to go all conspiracy theory here, but it is interesting.
Cue the tinfoil hat.
This episode aired March 4th, 1983. Guess what the number 1 song on the Billboard Top Tracks was on November 6th, 1982? Dirty Laundry.
I don't know.
Dirty Laundry. And I kind of wanted
to get us.
I did a search on Fred Lyle and Duncan Smith and Don Henley to see if I could find anything where they intersected, and I didn't. So at best, it might have been one of those things where they were aware of the song and they thought, hey, that's a good theme. I don't know. But I just found it curious that I kept going to this song.
Yeah.
And about 5 months, almost to the day, 5 months before the episode aired, that song was number 1. Go figure.
Well, it doesn't correlate the same way.
Well,
I did think of a song. It wasn't that one. No, I'm talking about the song I was thinking about.
Oh, okay.
I did think of a song. It wasn't that one, but it was released 10 years later. And so obviously it didn't influence the episode, but it definitely feels almost like it's directly commenting on the episode. I don't know if you know the song Too Much Information by Duran Duran.
Never listened to Duran Duran.
So the lyrics of the song, and here's just like an example of some of them. The first verse goes, "Destroyed by MTV, I hate to bite the hand that feeds me so much information. The pressure's on the screen to sell you things that you don't need. It's too much information." And then a little further down in the song, "It's pumping down the cable like never so before. A cola manufacturer is sponsoring the war. Here come the news with love from me to you." And just like another part of the song, "Turn on the tube, hits you with the groove, advertising music, we want you to choose it. These teeth are white, trainers ultra bright, this band is perfect, just don't scratch the surface." So it was very much, and he mentions that they mentioned 3 different stations in the song: MTV, ABC, and the BBC. And it just very much feels like they were commenting on the state of the news and media and etc. in 1993, but it also feels very relevant to this episode in a lot of ways, especially that idea of biting the hand that feeds you and being fed all of this, but at the same time tuning in for it because, as what is it Bernice says, the news is depressing, why not be turned on while you're watching it or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely did think of a song. It wasn't Dirty Laundry, but it was Duran Duran's Too Much Information.
Now that we've gone down that rabbit hole without even getting into the episode, let's get into the episode.
Some macro thoughts. That's what I'm calling it.
Yes. Anyway, at the beginning of the episode, we see Laura and Remington. They're arriving at a TV station. The station has been having issues with incidents. Can't really call them sabotage because they could be explainable by other means, but they've had incidents. And they are things like the sports scores being reversed and wrong temperatures and film being the wrong film when it's supposed to be this, it's that, it's something else. So
nursery rhymes, I think he said as well, was one on the teleprompter.
Yeah, nursery rhymes on the teleprompter. That's right. So Laura and Steele are showing up to meet with Ed Green.
It made me think of Red Green, which is a Canadian TV show as well. The Red Green Show.
So they're there to meet him, but they're using an interview with Steele as their cover story. And, I never thought about it before, again, before doing this podcast and taking my notes for this episode. And it's like, oh, is that a good idea?
Yeah.
I was trying to think what other story they could have used to get them entree. And I can't really think of anything, but there had to have been something. What are your thoughts?
It seems to me that they still could have done something, but not have it be with Russell Stewart, quote unquote, investigative reporter extraordinaire. They do puff pieces all the time. In fact, they make comments about that in the episode. So
that's true.
It seems to me that if she wanted a better cover, she could have easily just said, let's just do a puff piece. Like, Remington Steele's 10 best cases. I think he's had 10 now, so we could definitely, count those. And
he's got to save those for the book.
I mean, I don't think that's true. I don't think it's a terrible idea to have an interview, but to have an interview with this Russell Stewart person who we know is a fraud, but who they believe has exposed all of these people, maybe not have him ask the questions, maybe have it be one of the other anchors doing Chrissy Carstairs, for example.
Yes.
Who, by the way, the actress that plays her, Tracy Scoggins, is one of my absolute favorite actresses of the late 80s and the early 90s. She's been in this show. She was Cat Grant on Lois and Clark for the first season. She was on Babylon 5. She was in season 5, the Captain Lockley. And she played the immortal Highlander Cassandra and Highlander the series. All my favorite shows. She's popped up somewhere, and I love her. She's great.
Well, I recognized her name, but I don't think I've seen anything that she's been in other than this.
What about, you haven't seen season 5 of Babylon 5?
I've never watched Babylon 5. No.
Oh, dear. Okay, you need to fix that. Go.
You've heard it here, folks. I have been officially chastised.
Yeah. Well, I just figured if you're a Trekkie, you've seen Babylon 5.
Well, I was
so wrong. I apologize.
I've seen bits and pieces of the Star Lost.
Okay, that's fair. You're reinstated.
You know what that is, right?
Yeah.
That old Canadian TV show shot on videotape.
Yeah.
So bad, Harlan Nelson took his name off of it.
Hey, we needed the 35% CanCon. Okay, we had to do anything.
Anyway, so it's interesting as they're walking in, Steele's talking. He says, shades of Severide, Cronkite, Hugh Downs, trench coats and drizzle. And the sound of ack pant. It's like, I always wanted to be a reporter ever since I saw Joel McCrea in Foreign Correspondent. So there's our first movie reference. But my question is, first of all, there was no attribution given. Foreign Correspondent, Joel McCrea, Lorraine Day, United Artists, 1940. How old was Steele when he wanted to be a reporter? I mean, was this a childhood phase, like when kids want to be a fireman or a policeman or an astronaut or a pilot? Or was it something from his older years? Because obviously we know that Laura's interest in journalism was in her later years, because she says that she had been inspired by Elliot Walsh during her freshman year of college. So what do you think? Childhood fantasy or adult?
I mean, because that definitely feels like something you see in I want to be that. That looks so exciting. That looks thrilling, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. It just seems very much like a kid seeing the more thrilling parts of something sensationalized, and sensationalism is the name of the game in this episode. So that kind of leads me to think childhood.
Okay. But we know that Laura said that she had seen Elliot Walsh during her freshman year in college.
Yeah.
And that he kind of inspired her to consider becoming a journalist. My question was, okay, wait a second. She also said she was there on a math scholarship. So she's on a math scholarship, interested in journalism, studying to be a detective. How did those three intersect?
So here's my guess. And your system might be a bit different. But here you can get a scholarship for, say, math or English or whatever your marks are high in high school, and not necessarily make that your major. So, I mean, but she does say later on she was a math major, which leads me to conclude that she maybe got her undergraduate in math and then went on to do either a college course to get her private investigator's license or something that was complementary postgrad to supplement that, because a math degree on its own is not a private investigator's license. But a private investigator's license, I'm assuming, is not university. You don't need a university degree for, I'm going to guess. So my assumption is that she got her BA or B, whatever it is for math, I don't know, and then went on to get licensed to do a course or something.
I was going to throw out an abbreviation, but that would have been very unpleasant. A Bachelor of Math.
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah. Do you think that she just...
I've had doctors ask about that.
Do you think... Hey, I started it. Do you...
You did.
Do you think that her attending the lecture by Elliot Walsh was just something that she did on an impulse, or was it because there was some other motivation there which turned into an interest in journalism? To me, it's just a weird combination, because obviously she went to math, or she went to school on a math scholarship. She was a math major. Presumably, she also studied criminology as a major, because I can't imagine that a private detectives agency like Havenhurst would hire somebody that just walks in off the street. Hey, I want to be a detective. I
would.
They'd be looking for somebody that's got...
She might sound slightly smarter with a math degree, but okay.
I mean, they would be looking for somebody that's got either a background in law enforcement or who's studied criminology in school.
Criminology.
So it just to me, that combination, that triumvirate there of math, journalism, and detective criminology, just it's a weird combination.
I could be wrong on this. Here, in order to be a police officer, you have to go to the police college.
Mm-hmm.
You don't actually have to have any degree, as far as I'm aware, to get into police college. You get into the college and then you are trained.
Right.
That being said, I don't know how things obviously might differ, but for me, Laura is a contradiction. We've seen and will see that she is a mixture of practicality and impulse. We've seen it with her driving. We've seen it with the fact that she failed at her own agency and then said, well, screw it. I'm going to open up an agency and trick everybody and lie about who my quote unquote boss is. She comes across as being very straight-laced, but there is a simmering kind of impulsive and very almost reckless human being underneath. And whether it was just she saw a sign that he was giving a lecture, whether she watched him giving his newscasts on TV, whatever station he happened to be on before he ended up on Spotlight News, I just think that she recognized somebody who wanted the truth of things, and that's who she is at the core of her. And
okay.
Yeah.
And that parallels with being an investigator. You're trying to find the truth. So I can see a parallel there. Yeah. It's just one of those right turns.
It's an odd, it is, but I love just when she sees Elliot and she says, all because of that man. And there's so much reverence in her voice. And there's just, she looks, and we see this balding, aging, and JD Cannon is amazing. I love him, but he's just kind of slumped over and he just looks tired. And she doesn't see that. She sees this gloriously brilliant man who she admired and looked up to and who kind of helped shape who she is.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really love the way that Stephanie Zimbalist delivers that line and how she sees him when nobody, and Steele's like, that guy.
Yeah, she still sees him through the haze of hero worship.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course the episode dismantles that, but even after it does so very kindly. So it just, I love this episode. I love this one. So great.
So anyway, in the scene, we get a little bit of information dropped on us here. We learn that Elliot Walsh wears a toupee, seemingly inconsequential data drop, but it's there. We meet Amy Fogelson, who is the assistant to Russell Stewart, the investigative reporter, who is going to be doing Stewart's going to be doing the interview with Remington Steele. Amy Fogelson is doing the preliminary interview. And so we meet them. Interestingly enough, in Judith's book, she's listed as Amy Colbert, not Amy Fogelson. So
interesting.
And then later, when Amy Fogelson is revealed to be Agnes Fowling, in the script, the name is given as Agnes Fowler.
I did notice that. Yeah.
So, obviously some discrepancies between the various sources. I'm sure due to rewrites and other issues. But
she's also described as being very younger, and I don't know if and no, obviously no disrespect to the actress they got to play Amy Fogelson, whose name is escaping me at the moment. She's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But she's not young. She's, I would say, late 30s, early 40s ish. That's not exactly a kid.
Yeah.
And they keep referring, in fact, they call her a kid twice. I think Elliot calls her a kid and Ed Green says, did the kid buy it? And I'm like, did they hire her after and just not change the script? Because she's not a kid. She's a woman. She's an older.
Well, with Elliot, you can kind of understand it because there is a tendency for
he's older
people to call somebody younger than them kid. And I think we've even had this little conversation before. So that one is understandable. Ed Green, that one's a little harder to explain other than the fact that he's the boss and she is a subordinate. And sometimes bosses refer to subordinates, especially if they're assistants to somebody.
Or women.
Well,
I don't feel like he would have referred to male employees as the kid.
Maybe he wouldn't have. I wouldn't be surprised to see some younger male person called a kid by a supervisor.
Fair. I'm just saying Ed Green he slept with two of his anchor women.
Well, that's
so he's not exactly a paragon of moral virtue.
Yes. Anyway, we'll leave that there for the time being. So then after we meet these people, Amy leaves Laura and Steele alone, at which time Laura reminds Steele, we're here as a cover story. Be careful. And he says, I can take care of it.
Well, she's pumping me. I'll be pumping her.
Yeah. Yes. And we'll just leave that one there too.
Yep. That one will stay right where it is.
Now, a short time later, Ed Green comes up and he's talking to them, and he really does provide a good reason why they should have, as we discussed a few minutes ago, have chosen a different cover story, because he says, I hope Steele doesn't have any skeletons in his closet because Russell loves to rattle them for all the world to see. So, yeah, like you said, maybe they should have picked somebody other than an investigative reporter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That might have been a good plan.
Or at least laid down a set of ground rules.
Yeah, right? Like, have Ed Green basically go to Russell, because it's clear that he has no idea that Amy's the one basically behind Russell.
Right.
But have him go in there and say, okay, this is a very special guest. We're going to be gentle with our interview. We're not going to ask too many probing questions. Just go with it.
So Ed Green, as part of this conversation, does mention what we talked about earlier about the problems that they've had. He thought they were just routine foul-ups with the teleprompter having nursery rhymes, wrong film, basketball scores reversed, wrong temperatures. And he asked if they know about Nielsen and Arbitron. And I don't know if you guys have those up there or not, if that's something that is similar.
We do. We have Nielsen.
Okay.
I'm not sure about Arbitron, but we definitely have Nielsen, and it's actually a subsidiary, like part of the same branch. So it's a way of kind of, I guess, finding out what people are watching in other countries.
Yeah.
I was frankly surprised they care about Canada, but hey,
Well, they don't have Arbitron anymore, neither do we, because in 2013, Nielsen bought them. But yeah, at that time, they were competing companies that did station popularity viewership reports.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were out there, and I don't know if you've got any information about how they operate. I don't know how they operate now, but I know that back in this time frame, and I know this because my family got selected, and I did the record keeping
you got
on it.
The box.
Yeah. They sent you a book, and you just marked off, we watched this show for a half hour, an hour, whatever. So it wasn't really, despite their pretense of being scientific, it really wasn't all that scientific, because let's say that you weren't.
Well, you could have lied.
Well, exactly. Well, we normally watch this show, but we weren't at home tonight because we had some event going on at the school or whatnot. So we'll just pencil whip it.
Or maybe you're watching Dallas or Dynasty, but you want to sound smarter, so you put down something else, right? Like, I thought it was, here's what I thought it was, because this is what I'd read, and I mean, we never had we weren't selected or whatever it was, but I thought they gave you a box that sort of, like, it was an electronic box that monitored what your channels were and like what you were watching.
And that may have been part of their evolution, yes, but the time we were involved in it, and I don't remember when this was. This would have been back, I don't know, mid 70s maybe. Yeah, we got a book in the mail and we just filled it out.
Huh. So basically they gave you homework.
Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting, because I never, I mean, like I said, it was here, but it wasn't as, I mean, I was never selected. We were never, and I don't think they do it that way anymore. If at all. I don't know if with streaming, it would be hard to monitor, I would think.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because,
I mean, regular cable, you could do it there, but
it's funny because here recently, within the last month, and I'm trying to remember what it was, but I believe it was from Nielsen. And it was a paper form that I filled out and I just marked on, and I sent it back in, and they sent me $5 as a thank you. I mean, it wasn't very long. It was just like a single sheet. So it didn't take a whole lot of time and such, but yeah, it was just a fill out a form type thing. So they may have electronic devices that they've hooked up to various things and not I don't know, but yeah, all my encounters with them have been, oh yeah, let's just fill out this form the way we want to, not
right. Yeah, exactly. I want us to look like we're real smart. We're a really smart TV watching household. We are totally not watching The Bachelor.
That's right.
I have a question. Wouldn't Laura know about, because he says, have you heard of the ratings or Nielsen Arbitron? She says, I've heard of them, but he made it sound like this wouldn't be common knowledge, and I feel like it would. Maybe not Nielsen and how they function, but at least I feel like people would know that TV ratings are what shows need to stay on the air.
Well, nowadays, that's absolutely true. Back then, it might have been a little less known. I think there's probably certain segments of the population that were more aware of it because of their proximity to the television and movie industry. But
right,
maybe not everybody. And so him being in the industry, her not being in the industry, he just presumed that maybe she, even if she had heard of them, she didn't know the details of, not even the down and dirty details, but just the general details of what they were, why they existed, and what they did. But yeah, he says
they are their god.
Yeah, he says their ratings were poor. They jazzed up their news, gave it the happy news format. Says the public ate it up. Their ratings doubled. And the whole issue about the Arbitron and Nielsen and why he suspected sabotage was because, as he put it, television is a cutthroat business, dog eat dog, a fierce competition for the advertising dollar, and for every rating point you get, another station loses one. So, yeah, if they have doubled their ratings and they are now the top station in the market, yeah, you can understand why he might think that somebody's out to get him.
Yeah, for sure.
But he doesn't want the news to get out. He says if this gets out, we'll be the laughingstock of the television community. That one, I wondered about that line, because if somebody else is trying to sabotage them, if a competitor is trying to sabotage them, wouldn't that give them a great news story? How would that?
You would think.
How would that be? How would that make them a laughingstock in the television community? I would think that's a great PR thing.
For sure.
We're so important. We are so high in the ratings. So many people watch us that our competition's trying to sabotage us. That's how good we are.
It's one of those things that maybe that's how they would approach it now. Because now it's almost like anybody in the spotlight for any reason is good enough. All publicity is good publicity, but maybe back then it would have been, maybe they were holding on to whatever thread of integrity they felt was left with the news. And so therefore, obviously not much of a thread, but a tiny thread. So trying to appear more professional if they're being sabotaged, then it makes them look, well, they're a news station, they should be able to figure this out, right?
Yeah, but I would think that would be a fantastic PR tool.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, definitely they would work it now. That angle would be worked to death now.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
And I believe at this time, in the past in the US, you could not mention a competitor. But I believe at this time you could. So, for example, a toothpaste brand could not mention a competing toothpaste brand. They could say brand X and brand Y, but Crest couldn't say Aquafresh.
I have a fun story.
So, yeah, they couldn't previously, but I think at this time they could have. So they could have said, especially if they find out, they could use this as very strategic tool against that competitor.
Actually, I'm gonna actually. Do you know what the first commercial to name a competitor was, and when? As
I was doing some research on this episode, I happened to run across that. That was Burger King mentioned McDonald's.
Yes.
And who was the actress?
It was Sarah Michelle Gellar from Buffy the Vampire Slayer,
and she got sued.
And the ad was in 19. She did. She was banned from McDonald's. But the ad was in 1981, so they were mentioning competitors at this point.
And I mean, come on, she's just an actress reading the lines.
She's 5.
Don't sue her.
I mean, she was 5.
Now this story is an example of a PR person who is an idiot. and doesn't know their
absolutely.
job because I'm sorry, the old saying that any publicity is good publicity, including bad publicity. No, you do.
No, I agree, but that was kind of the prevailing theory.
That was a really dumb move on McDonald's part.
Yes, it was.
Anyway,
it was really stupid. Can I point out as well, when Chrissy begins her newscast, she mentions that there's a palace spokesperson denying rumors that Princess Di was pregnant again. I did the math. This was 1983. Prince Harry's birthday is September 15th, 1984. She would have had to have been somewhat like 6 months pregnant by this point, I think, ish. If I'm doing the math right. So that's rather funny. I wonder if they knew that or if it was.
Well, his birthday was in 1984. This was
September 15th. Yeah.
Okay. So this was March of 83. So that's a year and a half. So yeah, she wouldn't have been.
Yeah, my math sucks. I didn't get the math scholarship. Yeah. But it is
But yeah, it's timely.
I guess it's funny that they mention it because she would have gotten pregnant very soon after. And
I imagine that at that time there would have been a lot of speculation about that sort of thing.
True.
But
a bun in the royal oven.
Yeah. Anyway, it's interesting that as the newscast is getting ready to get started, the cast is getting ready to run out to their set, and Ed Green tries to jazz them up by saying, "Energy, people, energy, energy. Remember, we love our work and we love each other. We're happy and we show it." This reminds me of,
oof.
Those motivational posters?
Yeah. Hang in there with the cat hanging on the thing. In my experience, if your boss has to remind you to be happy, you're probably miserable.
Yeah. Well, anytime I think of those motivational posters, my thoughts automatically go to a website that I've known about for decades called despair.com.
Oh, I got to check this out. I've never been to despair.com.
Their slogan is motivational products don't work, but our demotivator products don't work even better.
Oh my, okay. I'm going right now and having a look.
For example, they do these posters and they call them demotivators. And it's customer service because we're not satisfied until you're not satisfied.
I love this. The first one I see says collaborate, and it's got a frog on top of a turtle. And then it says, so the best of us have to carry the rest of us.
Yes. Or stupidity.
I'm gonna put those up in my classroom.
Stupidity. Quitters never win. Winners never quit. But those who never win and never quit are idiots. Or apathy.
This is good. I like this.
Apathy. If we don't take care of the customer, maybe they'll stop bugging us.
Oh, this is good.
I have known about this website for years.
I'm looking at some of these.
I'm
looking at some of these, and these are great.
In the early days, their website was a lot funnier than it is now. I remember, the little smiley faces. They had a frowny face, and occasionally they would send out emails or things. And at one time, they posted something about, if you ordered a frowny face from us, please be patient. We have one lady in the back room typing these out on a typewriter. And another time they did an announcement, the quarterly announcements of, hey, our company's doing great. We made these profits. Well, they did that. And they said something to the effect that obviously our increase in business and our profit margins going up is a bad thing. So in order to increase employee dissatisfaction, we're just going to randomly fire 25% of our people. This is
the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Yes. That is the whole concept behind this website. So it is a great website. But yeah, when I hear him, Ed Green, we're happy, we love each other, we love our work. And it's like, this is what I think of. This is where my mind goes.
Do you though? Yeah, definitely. I love this. It's a great website now. Use it.
So anyway, we get into the newscast and we have inane non-stories. Like you mentioned, the rumor is Princess Di pregnant again. And
all of Elizabeth Taylor's last names.
Oh, yeah. And The whole cast of this news team is just, it's horrible. Chrissy Carstairs, which we've already talked about, is bubble-headed bleach blonde.
Yeah.
Hoop Tracy. What is with silly nicknames for sports reporters? I don't get it.
I don't know.
Uncle Tim.
Oh, no.
Uncle Tim. And
his real name is Uncle. He changed it legally. That's my favorite thing about him.
So anyway, we're introduced to all these characters here, and it's a good, clever way to introduce them all. Got to give them credit for that.
Do you know how the script describes them?
Oh, I didn't look at that.
Okay, you got to hear these because some of them are pretty. Elliot and Chrissy seat themselves at the anchor's chairs with precisely groomed toupee and enviably flat stomach. He looks a good 10 years younger because he's wearing, I guess, a corset. She's barely 30 with flawless features, large, bright, if somewhat vacant eyes, and a figure that would melt the polar ice cap. So there's that. And then, let's see. Uncle Tim, now dressed in a yellow rain slicker and wading boots, it's hard to tell whether the goofy 50-year-old is a Disney character or a major sex offender. Can't make that up.
Years ago, there was a mayor in Portland, Oregon, Bud Clark. He had owned a tavern, and he ran for mayor. And prior to running to mayor, he had put out a poster. I wish I could remember what the gag was, but it was him in a raincoat from the back, holding it.
Right.
It was. I wish I could remember the gag. It was funny. Expose yourself to art or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but it was funny. But as a mayor, he wasn't very funny. It was about as funny as you would expect. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, that's Uncle Tim's description, and I gotta say, after reading that, I could not
unsee it.
I couldn't get it out of my head. I couldn't unsee it once it was seen. So, yeah, I had to give that to everybody else. Here's my gift to you.
So anyway, as the news team is there and they're pretending to do the news, an overhead light falls and nearly bonks Russell Stewart on the head. Then we jump to the offices of the Remington Steele Agency, and Murphy is telling everybody that the safety clamp on the lamp was sheared. And Steele, during the course of the conversation, seems to discount the likelihood that a competing station would resort to such a thing. And Murphy kind of goes along with that, it seems like. He says, well, if it wasn't sabotage to discredit Spotlight News and drive viewers away from the channel, then maybe whoever it was occupying that chair was the target. Going back to, can't think of the episode name, Peplars. We have Remington.
Hearts of Steel.
Hearts of Steel. We have Remington Steele coming up with another line that is just, he doesn't attribute it to Murphy, but it almost feels like he's trying to. First, we have the female jock strap.
Yeah. Jocks. They're called jocks.
That's right. Let's see. And then Laura says, well, but then Uncle Tim took that place, and Stewart was about to take that spot when the light fell. So whoever it was. And this is where Bernice says the line that you referenced earlier. The news is very depressing these days, and Russell Stewart is hot to look at. I say, if you're going to get depressed, you might as well get turned on doing it.
Okay. So here's where I'm going to call bullshit. Pardon. Oh, am I allowed to say that? I just did. So. Here's where I'm going to call bullcrap.
Okay.
I feel like the show keeps presenting us with these men and telling us that these men are extremely attractive. And I'm not saying this is personal preference. It's more that I'm seeing very bland, interchangeable men that they are presenting as being these. Look to the last episode, right? Teddy, who was billed as being kind of a himbo, right? Really hot, but not that bright. I'm seeing a bunch of doughy white guys who kind of all look the same and not seeing the appeal. And I don't know if it's because we're supposed to contrast them with Steele or Murphy, but I feel like they've picked like women that are noticeably very attractive. Chrissy Carstairs is a good-looking woman. I mean, it's one of the maybe not something that would appeal to everybody, but
she's like about 4 pounds of frosting. You can only get a few bites in.
Well, I don't see any frosting in these dudes. Well, I just see ordinary looking dudes.
Yeah. Well, I think you might have anyway. I think you might be onto something when you say they don't want to have somebody there to compete with Steele and Murphy.
Yeah, but James Reed is a good looking man.
But by the same token, they've got, well, how to put this? They've got these women who are, I'm going to say, not necessarily really attractive in my judgment, but they are very pretty, and they do tend to outshine Stephanie in terms of their appearance because they are all, they're flash. They're
going to completely flash.
Yeah. They're a bit more like flash paper. It's a quick flash, and then it's over, done. I'm through with that. Mm-hmm. They're not like a light bulb where it's maybe not as bright, but it lasts longer. But yeah, it does seem that there's kind of a, if this is the theory we're going to attribute to the choice of the male actors, there does seem to be an inconsistency there. They don't mind overshadowing Stephanie with these beautiful women, but let's not overshadow Pierce and James. I don't know.
I think more so with the female characters that have been on the show. It's not. I don't even think it's so much to overshadow Stephanie as it is to contrast these women versus Laura. Laura being beautiful, she's stunning, but doesn't need all the makeup and enhancements and everything else to look beautiful and stunning. Whereas all of these other women are supposedly the type of women that Steele is normally attracted to.
And all they are is
makeup,
is enhancements.
They're just, and they make comments about that throughout the episode with Chrissy. So anyway, just kind of popped into my head that, and the fact that Laura's laying on the desk, which is weird. It's not quite couch watch, but does no one use chairs? I don't get it. What's wrong with their chairs?
Well, I guess she's not really laying on the desk. She was sitting on it, and she's stretched out and laying over, writing on the notepad. But no, I get your point. Yeah, it's got to be pretty uncomfortable.
It does not look comfortable at all.
No.
It looks very awkward.
Should have probably been better off on the floor. So
yeah, everybody likes the floor. That's where she and Steele ended up in Hearts of Steel. So.
Mm-hmm. So, anyways, this conversation's going on. Steele suggests that they split up, and that each interrogate one of the possible targets to see if there might be something to Murphy's theory. And Laura tells Steele to steer clear of Russell Stewart. Well, wrong person to steer clear of, but that's who she tells him. That's who she warns him off of. Because obviously she doesn't want Stewart asking Steele any embarrassing questions. And Steele arrogantly says, not a problem. Avoiding embarrassing questions is child's play for a seasoned that word. Prevaricator.
That word.
For a seasoned prevaricator. I'm sorry, my tongue got wrapped around my eye teeth and I couldn't see what I was saying. So Steele ends up assigned to Hoops Tracy. And Murphy definitely is not happy about being stuck with Uncle Tim.
Oh, poor Murphy.
Why do I always get the weirdos?
It's the weirdo.
And Steele, perhaps because you relate to them so well, Murphy.
I love these two in this episode. This is, again, one of a really good, that has such good interactions between Steele and Murphy. And again, I go back to my theory of that they're at their best when they're playing off each other and not talking about Laura.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they're funny.
Although in this one, as usual, or as is very often the case, Steele gets the upper hand. But anyway, we'll get to that.
He does.
Murphy walks in on Uncle Tim, who is playing with a pellet rifle. And this is where Murphy calls him Tim. And he said,
Uncle?
And he says, my name's Uncle. First name's Uncle, last name's Tim. Had it legally changed. So you can call me Mr. Tim.
Mr. Tim.
Oh,
yeah, definitely gets the weirdos.
No, I understand people using pseudonyms, fake names, stage names. I mean, it's done in TV and radio all the time. I've heard some really bizarre names. For example, up here we have a area called the Matanuska Valley, and one of the local radio stations had a DJ who was using the name Matt Valley. It's it's an obvious play on that. And of course, remember WKRP Johnny Fever? Yeah. He had 6 different names prior to being Johnny Fever. But I can't imagine somebody having their name legally changed to something as insane as Uncle Tim. Hi, my name's Tim. Uncle.
Yeah.
Oh, you're the man from Uncle? No, my name is Uncle.
No, I'm Uncle Tim.
I mean, what does this say about him?
He's not all there. He's definitely not playing with a full deck, as we see throughout what little he's in of the episode. Yeah, he's a weird one. Murphy does get the weirdos.
Well, definitely gets in this case, he definitely did. Yes. Yeah. And so Murphy tries to get him to talk, and he says he's with the insurance company. He points out that it was a close call, and is there anybody who might have wanted to see him under the light when it fell? And Uncle points the gun at Murphy and pushes him out of the room with it. Tim. Says, nobody wants to kill me. And if they did, I know exactly who it is. Not so.
Also, Murphy's not exactly keeping things quiet by coming straight in and saying, I'm with the insurance company. Does anyone want to kill you? Okay. Way to be subtle there, Murph.
Yeah. But I mean, it's an obvious question, I guess. Particularly, I'm sure that at this point, the information that the light clamp had been shared was probably, if it wasn't common knowledge, it was probably already going through the station. But
right.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably not the best approach to take with somebody like this. I mean, I wouldn't let this guy near me with a butter knife. He's
right.
He's nuts. So next we see Steele. He's at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, and he's meeting Hoops Tracy outside the locker room of the local football team. And I like this little exchange. I must say, you have an excellent stride, Miss Hoop.
Yeah.
I was a power forward on my college basketball team. I've always enjoyed motorized sports.
Motorized sports. Yeah.
Now.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
Except that, didn't we have an episode previously where he and Murphy were talking, and Murphy said something about how he likes going out and shooting hoops, and Steele says something to the effect that, I've never shot a hoop. Are they a very large bird?
Yeah. Are they hard to? Yeah. So he clearly still doesn't know anything about basketball.
Yeah. But now he thinks it's a motorized sport as opposed to something you go hunt.
Yeah. He's improving. He's getting closer.
I suppose.
Getting there. Working on it.
So they go inside the locker room, and I've got to say, she seems a little less interested in getting a story than
that's what I thought too.
I wrote down obnoxious. Boy, she's demeaning the players and the staff. She's abusing her position all she can. It seems to me she's got a really, really big chip on her shoulder, all going back to when she got stuck outside and wasn't allowed into the locker room and was basically ignored. And now she's just revenge.
So here's my question, though. Was it common for, I mean, we don't do that here. Is it common for reporters to actually go in the locker room? Because anytime I watch a hockey game and they interview, someone between periods, it's always outside the locker room. So I don't think I've ever seen an in the locker room interview with any of the players. That just struck me as odd, because they would be in a state of undress.
Well, I think
walking in with a camera.
I think that was part of the issue that Hoops Tracy had, was because I do seem to recall that sports writers did do interviews in the locker room. I would presume that they were held out for a period of time to give the players a chance to get dressed.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
or
sense.
They may have been allowed in while the players were first coming in, and then shoot out so that the players could take their showers and such. I've seen, I don't watch a lot of sports, but I've seen video of interviews of players that did seem to take place in the locker room. But yeah, it would definitely be a problem. They would definitely have to have some controls on it.
Well, you couldn't just walk in there with a camera, which is what she does. She walks in there with her cameraman behind her.
Well,
and I would think,
I think they do.
I think their little tushes fly.
I think they did. Now they may not do that anymore, but I do know I have seen video. You can probably find them on YouTube's and such, interviews of players that are done on camera in the locker rooms. So I don't know how common it was and how long that sort of thing lasted, but there was some. Yeah.
To go back to your comment on what you're right. She seems aggressive, almost angry. And I don't know if it's just because she had to wait outside. I think it's probably a combination of that, plus the fact that she admits later on that she had to sleep with Ed Green just to get the sports assignment, that women were typically not allowed or not welcome doing things like sports reporting. She's probably had to overcome a lot of, and again, that doesn't excuse her behavior. She doesn't do her job here. She goes in there and basically just humiliates these guys, but doesn't actually get anything she can use for any sort of story. But I get the impression that the chip that she's got on her shoulder is more to do with overall her treatment in the industry, not just one specific thing of I'm not allowed in the locker room. She went so far as to get a court order. I mean, that's, I think it's more to do with other reporters wouldn't necessarily have to sleep with the boss to get the job, right? It's the casting couch.
Well, I don't know. We find out later that that's what Chrissy did to get her job.
That's what Russell's trying to do. Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's what I mean though. Chrissy, Hoop, but not necessarily any of the male reporters.
Oh, okay.
Elliot's there and he's an aging, and granted they're preparing to kind of get rid of him, but his reputation still carries weight, even if they are putting him in corset and toupee. So I think it's more just that whole casting couch mentality of I have to be attractive, I have to be hot, I have to be visually appealing, I have to be this, be that. Whereas
she doesn't fit into that mold.
The case for exactly, and that's what happens with Amy when she tries to fill in for Uncle Tim.
Yeah,
you got a behind the scenes kind of face.
Yes.
So.
So anyway, so after Hoops has thoroughly antagonized all the players, she and Steele have a little bit of a final back and forth, and it seems to me that she's trying to hit on him.
I like you, Limey. You're kind of novel. Want to hoist some brewskis with me after the show? It's a great line. And
he seems to be a little uncomfortable with that. Is it just because he's not used to that approach, or is it something about her personally? I wonder. I don't know.
I think he's out of his depth. He has no idea what she's saying.
Well, that could be too. Yeah. That could be.
She's taking him when he ends up in this bar with peanuts on the floor, and they're and I don't think that he's necessarily opposed to drinking beer, but it's clear that he's drinking something that's probably like watered down pee, like a Bud Light or something. Yeah. And
anything from Budweiser.
He's out of his element. That's not what he's used to. He's used to fancy French restaurants and nameplates that he gives out, which we don't still know where they come from, but like that's,
and he's apparently run out of,
and motorized sports. Like this woman is nothing.
That's true.
There's nothing about her that is familiar to him. So he doesn't know how to navigate it. And that's what I kind of think it is.
Okay. All right. Well, next we jump to Laura and Russell Stewart in a car, and he's telling her that he is convinced it was meant for him, and not just who might be ever standing under the light at the time. And I've helped put several in prison, Miss Holt, frauds, charlatans, conmens. And that line
repeats itself.
Yes. I'm going to say, stick a pin in it because it comes up again.
Yeah.
But it seems a bit presumptuous and almost egotistical on his part to just assume it was meant specifically for him.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so
he's all ego, though.
Yes, he is. He's almost in some ways the male counterpart to Chrissy, other than the fact that he didn't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He
didn't sleep his way to the top.
He kind of is, though. Later on, he's trying to get Chrissy to take him with, or to get him into Ed Green's spot.
Yeah, and so he is doing that, but
by pounding the tension from her butt.
Yes. But obviously in other ways he's kind of the male counterpart to Chrissy as well, because he doesn't do any of the work. He's just a talking head, repeating the questions that he's fed by Amy Fogelson and the research that she's done. So he's as much an airhead. He does a better job of hiding it he's as much an airhead as Chrissy is. Laura starts to express some concern about his attitude, being nonchalant and courageous. And I'm almost thinking she's being sarcastic when she says that. And of course he says, well, I'm a courageous guy. Hey, baby, let's.
I just, that was a heavy eye roll watching that whole exchange.
But, she's up to the challenge of Stuart, but there seems to be some part of her that, is almost like, okay, how do I respond to this without, because she's obviously in a position where she can't totally alienate him because he's part of an investigation, whether he's a suspect, a potential victim or whatnot. She's got to keep that relationship working. And to me, there seems like there's almost this level of, okay, I obviously he's full of it, but how do I deal with this without totally ruining the situation?
I 100% agree. But interestingly enough, that's all in Stephanie's performance.
Mm-hmm.
Because the direction here says she laughs, intrigued by this cool, handsome, debonair crusader for truth and justice. So
no intrigue. I'm sorry, no intrigue, which I think is a good choice on Stephanie's part.
Survey says not the case. It just does not compute in her performance at all. Her performance is the opposite, that she sees through him and is, like you said, I got to keep him on the hook, but I don't want to. I mean, I'm not going to date this guy. This guy's an idiot, right? So there's definitely that kind of, she's threading the needle.
Yes.
She's definitely threading that needle.
And,
for sure.
And it was a good performance on her part, as you say.
It's great.
Later, we're in the studio. Tensions are running high because they just are. But it's also enhanced by the fact that Uncle Tim is missing. And Ed says, well, if they can't find him or he doesn't show up, somebody's going to have to do the weather. To which,
why?
Elliot's sarcastic remark. Why? That's a nice little touch there. And Green approached.
It is. It's great. J.D. Cannon, I worship.
He does a great job in this episode. He really does.
He's so fantastic. He shows up again, and I can't remember the episode he's in again, but he does appear in a different role later on. But he's
Steele.
Just so good here. It's. Oh yes, that's it. Yes, I was trying to remember what it was.
Le Renard.
Yeah. He's just so good here.
So anyway, Ed goes up to Hoops and says, Hoops, you used to do the weather. What about filling in for Uncle Tim? And her response is, they don't have weather girls anymore, Ed. It's considered sexist. And it's like, wait a second. He didn't go to you and say.
I feel like they did, though.
Huh?
I feel like they did have weather girls still.
Well,
I don't think they did away with weather girls in 1983.
They had people doing weather. Some of them were men, some of them were women.
Yeah, I feel like there's, exactly.
And he didn't go to her and say, well, Hoops, you're a female. Why don't you do the weather? No, he went to her and said, look, you've got experience doing this.
Yeah, she had done it before. Yeah. It wasn't, you're right. It was.
So, it's like, wow, attitude much, lady? And
I'm wondering if maybe she felt that if she did it, that she'd get demoted back to doing it. That if she filled in this one time, she might lose what little gains she had made because she had to sleep with Ed to get the sports assignment. It wasn't something she got on merit, like she accuses Chrissy of later on. So, yeah.
Pam at the Michael Scott Paper Company. Remember that? If I go back to answering the phone, I'm back to being a receptionist. Yes.
I'm back to being exactly. Okay, so I wonder if she was afraid that could be her fate if she fills in once.
Okay. Yeah. So I can buy that. Now, having just defended Ed, I'm going to throw him under the bus because next, like you said, Amy steps up and says, look, I'll fill in. And this is where he said, sorry, kid, you've got a face. Or you got a behind the scenes face.
Behind the scenes kind of face.
Which is actually that line. I don't know if that line specifically was commonly used in television, but a variation of that line I am familiar with goes back to
Face for Radio.
That's right. Yeah, a face for radio. Yeah. So there's some history to this line, at least. It doesn't mean that it was appropriate to be said. He could have turned her down in another way, especially if she's never done that before and is not used to being on camera.
Well, we know she has. I don't know if she was ever on camera, but she definitely has worked in the news, which we find out later. Which I don't know how much of that history he knows.
Yeah, but on camera is a different thing.
True. Yes.
People get on camera and they think, well, it's just a camera, but then they get on there and that big red light on top of it is glowing, and they see the lens looking at them, and it suddenly runs through their brain that thousands of people are watching them, and all of a sudden it's like the weather, So
but all he had to do was step on a button, though.
Right, but they still had to be able to talk, and that's the thing, is that people get on camera and they do have stage fright, and if she's never been on camera, you could use that as a reason to say, look, at some point we'll go ahead and get you trained so you can do this, but you've never been on camera before. This is not a good time to try this as an experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. That would have been a much better response.
Yeah. And then he goes one step further and tells Chrissy that she's going to have to fill in for Uncle Tim. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe he did pick her because she's the woman and she's good looking.
Yeah.
And
she's pretty.
Yeah.
And hey, who doesn't want to see water fall on top of her? Although I gotta say,
I never thought about that, but you're right. Oh man, out of my brain.
Sorry. Would that not ruin their carpeting as well, to constantly have water splashing down on it? I would think that would be. It's carpet. I noticed it's carpet.
Yeah. Well,
so, anyway,
and get moldy and but
it wouldn't smell great, I don't think.
No, and you're right. Dropping water on a woman like that would probably be a bit too much for TV at that time.
Yeah.
And my other thought was that surely there's somebody else that he could have brought in to do it. And in fact, later we do see that he brings somebody else in to replace Uncle Tim.
Yeah.
So maybe they were short on time. They didn't have time to go grab anybody else, but he had time to, I don't know. I mean, you could make an argument. Okay, you're not going to have Russell do it because he's the investigative reporter. You're not going to have Elliot do it because he's the anchor, but then you kind of destroy that argument when you say, well, but Chrissy's the second anchor.
She's the co-anchor. Yeah.
So,
he literally only asks the quote unquote Hoop Tracy might not be attractive in the same way that Chrissy is, but she's still
not ugly.
She's not ugly. She's pleasing to the eye. Whereas he says to Agnes, you've got a behind the scenes kind of face indicating that she is not attractive enough to be on camera.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a double standard.
Yeah. So anyway, he grabs Chrissy and he walks her over and as you say, he's teaching her how to use the rain button. You push the button with your foot. I'll talk really slow for you, Chrissy. And then when he does, of course,
she might need the training.
Remedial training on button pushing. But when he pushes the button, Uncle Tim drops from the ceiling, dead.
Oh, poor Uncle Tim.
Yeah. Well, next we see Murphy examining the body and says it looks like a blow to the back of the head. And Ed loudly proclaims, it was just an accident, folks. Happens every day.
Just an accident.
It's like
he was checking his water trough.
Does he really believe that, or is he just trying to convince everybody else?
Literally, you just said word for word what it was in my notes. Verbatim.
And that's what I've got in my notes. That's why I said it.
Chrissy's maybe not the only one who's not that bright.
I mean, to me, the way he said it, it's almost like he's trying to convince everybody that it was an accident. It's pretense.
He definitely is.
It's an act, but yeah.
Well, you don't want your news team scattering to the four winds either.
Well, that's true.
And there is now a dead body on the floor. So
but at this point, I think the newscast is over. It
right?
doesn't matter whether they go to the four winds or not. It's over. You're going to the commercial. You're going to go into a TV show. You're going to run a rerun of Mannix or whatever.
Just show last night's news. No one will know the difference, as Chrissy suggests.
That's true.
I don't think she's wrong, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. Well, that happens after Christy's disappeared because she did run to the Four Winds and she's hiding out in her dressing room.
Yeah.
And I like the lead up into her line there because she's locked in there and she does. They're trying to get her out and she says, why? It's the same thing all the time. Inflation, unemployment. Yeah. And then she said, why don't you just rerun last night's news? And of course, Murphy.
Oh, Murphy
sees an opportunity to fulfill the dream of a lifetime. He's been waiting his whole life to do this. Bust down the door.
All season, he's desperately been wanting to break down the door. Oh,
and of course, Laura's like, are you sure this is a good idea? And Laura, you know how long I've waited to do this. And then just as he's getting ready to take his shot and he begins running at the door, Green tells Chrissy, if you don't come out right now, Hoop's our new anchor woman. And of course, she can't have that.
Opens.
She opens the door just as Murphy reaches it, and he goes crashing in.
Crash. It's great. This was a great little bit. And then Murphy limping out. Poor guy.
I should have kicked it in.
Should have kicked it in. Oh.
That is.
Poor Murphy.
James Reed did a good job on that one.
They use him so well in this episode, even if it's not as much as it should be. They use him really well, and it just goes to show that if used well, Murphy is a great character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, next, we see Steele and Amy Fogelson, and he's trying to pump her while she's trying to pump him. And he asks her assessment of the mishaps at the station, and who would want to kill a weatherman? And it's obvious. She's got a one-track mind. She doesn't care about the fact that Steele is investigating Uncle Tim's death, probably because she doesn't care about him. And I like her line. When he asks who would want to kill a weatherman, she says, anyone who's interested in journalism.
Yeah. Ouch.
Calls him a third-rate burlesque act, a clown.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, not just a clown who puts on a raincoat, pours water on his head, and tells people what they already know. She calls the entire program a circus. So, yeah, she is not a big fan of happy news either.
I think there's a certain amount of jealousy in it, though. I think she does want to be on camera, and she does want to be part of the team, and she was dismissed. I don't think she volunteered just to help out. I think she saw that as her chance and then was, of course, waved aside. So I think, part of it is that it's not serious journalism and she knows that. But the other part is it's that, like, I don't have any respect for it, but I still want to be part of it. I still want to be on the team.
Yeah. And of course, we find out later that Elliot was involved in her getting hired. So she obviously has some respect for him, and he's on camera. He's in front of the people, and I guess I can see that. I think really she probably is overlooking the fact that, appearance aside, she is probably best suited for what she's doing. That's probably her best talent, her best skill. But I can understand the sentiment.
Well, and you see it later when she's practicing her questions.
Yes.
In front of an invisible camera.
That's true.
She's imagining herself in that position, right? So she definitely, I think there's a part of her that wants to be what the news used to be. Not necessarily what it is, but definitely what it used to be.
Yeah. Well, after their conversation about Uncle Tim, she starts questioning Steele and says that, well, according to his official bio, which can be mercifully described as sketchy, he is supposedly connected with certain government agencies and international organizations. However, neither the Central Intelligence Agency, Interpol, or MI5 have any record of you. It's like, there's a great exchange that follows this. And Steele says, a man's death seems far more important than the humble beginnings of a private investigator. She says, who are you? My life's an open book with a lot of blank pages.
A lot of blank pages. Yeah. I feel like he could have dodged this question a little better by simply saying, well, of course they would say they've never heard of me. That's what they're supposed to. That's what intelligence looks like. I feel like he could have played into that a little bit better than just simply brushing past it. But it is a really good exchange between the two of them. It's almost like a chess match.
Yes. That's a good way to describe it. Because they are both trying to maneuver each other into admitting something or revealing something. So, yeah. So next we jump to the Golden Lady Ballroom. Big band music is playing.
Yeah.
And there are several elderly couples dancing, a few more sitting at tables scattered around the room. And we see Laura. She looks around, spots Elliot Walsh, sans toupee, and goes to his table.
Yep.
He invites her to sit down, and he accuses her of having discovered his secret vice.
Yeah.
You know, the couple of scenes that we have in this ballroom, I don't know if any place like that exists anymore, but that would be cool if it did.
It would really be cool.
Because I'm a fan of big band music anyway,
cool.
so it would be the kind of place I would love to at least go to once. But anyway, Walsh says that he knows why she's there, and it's to ask about Uncle Tim. But first, she kind of takes a little detour. She recounts the time she saw him at the lecture while she was in college, and she asks, why would someone with his background and experience be doing an anchor job for something like Spotlight News? Obviously, she sees the discrepancy between him and what he's doing now. And he says, well, you have to change with times, roll with the punches, go with the flow, and all those cliches. Says he's actually grateful for being able to do it because his kind of reporting is passé. And that while there are still some that dig for their own stories and do their own research and write their own copies, it's rare in these days of male models and junk food news. And I wrote down, protesteth too much.
This definitely hints. Yeah.
Yeah. He tries to make it seem like he's grateful for it and that he recognizes that things have changed and he's trying to adapt. But of course, as we find out later, he's really not. But I think he doesn't do too good a job of hiding his true feelings. I think they come out in how he puts it.
I think he's probably one of the most complex and likable murderers that we've seen on this show, in that I don't see his, and she kind of clocks it when she writes his confession, where he started out just trying to embarrass them, and eventually it just sort of spiraled, almost like Crimes of Passion, where he's just snapping. And it feels to me that he's there. We see him there twice, once after the first murder and the other after Chrissy is killed. And he's reckoning with himself. He's not happy about what he's done. And maybe that slip is him subconsciously wanting to be caught because he knows that what he's done there's a psychological term I heard that's usually meant to describe vets that have PTSD, but essentially what they have is called a moral injury, where they've done something that goes fundamentally against their values in every way, shape, or form, and they just cannot reconcile that with what they've done. It's just, they're too far apart. And I feel like that's the case with Elliot, that he's sitting there, he's trying to convince himself maybe that he's grateful for Spotlight News, and at the same time, as you say, it's slipping out. It's not easy for him to hide it, but he's so charming while he does it. And Laura is just so taken with him. She still sees this man who lectured at her college. She doesn't see this aging man, this bitter man. She sees the man that she was afraid to talk to all those years ago. And it makes it so much more heartbreaking at the end when he lets her down.
Yeah, he is really a very likable person. And it reminds me of I'm going to go there again. It reminds me of a Murder, She Wrote episode where one of the reoccurring characters, one of the Cabot Cove residents, winds up committing a murder, and he says something to the effect that I'm out of control, I can't stop myself, and the context is I need somebody to stop me because I can't do it. And I think that's what you're alluding to here is that he started out trying to just embarrass, but then it got to the point where he was no longer able to control his actions and stop his actions. And even though a part of him knew what he was doing is wrong, there was another part of him that was just pushing him past it. But it was he is definitely a very likable character, and it's one of those bittersweet murderer situations.
It's extremely bittersweet. We just feel for him so deeply, and he's a killer. I mean, we shouldn't, but he warns her about believing in heroes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Laura is determined to believe in him. And that scene where they're dancing together, I think, is the first scene where she ever mentions her father, too.
Right there in my notes. First real reference to her father.
Yeah. So there's definitely this feeling that she is looking at him as a mentor-ish figure, not necessarily a father figure, but a figure of somebody who has shaped her path. And that's why she's gone. Technically, he's a suspect, but she goes to him and asks if he has any theories. She doesn't suspect him at all.
Well, asking a suspect if they have any theories is kind of a time-honored trope in mysteries. And maybe even in real life, too, where you have something like this, although usually most murders are pretty straightforward. Yeah, we know who did it. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But, you can use that as a means of trying to get them to say something. But yeah, what you were saying about her father, I'm not sure that she's necessarily, obviously she didn't approach Elliot with a connection to her father initially.
No,
it was, he's a man who really inspired me with some of the things that he said and did. But here, when she says, I remember when I was a little girl, my father used to dance with me like this. And he'd pick me up in his arms so that my feet would dangle way above the floor, and he'd twirl me around in the living room. And it's at this point that she's making that connection with her father. It's not that she's seen him as a father substitute, but she's that emotional connection there is being made.
And that's a very vulnerable thing to say to somebody who's essentially a stranger. She hasn't said anything about her father to Steele, or to our knowledge much about him to Murphy or Bernice either, but this person, because he's such an idol of hers, and I feel like there's this immediate connection between them where she recognizes his passion for the truth, and he recognizes her same thing, and she quotes what he said at that lecture, where a good reporter tells the facts, a great reporter knows their meaning, which comes up again later on. There's just this feeling of respect, mutual respect between them.
They're kindred spirits.
It's really well done. This is so well done.
Yeah, they're kindred spirits in that sense.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So anyway, as you said, she asks him his theories about Uncle Tim's death, and of course he has a lot of info. Some of it is personal opinion, but there's good information in here. He calls Uncle Tim a goofball. Not terribly bright, not terribly offensive, harmless enough.
Yeah.
He says Chrissy's up for an anchor job in New York, and she had no intention of taking him with her. So she thought he was an albatross and something to be discarded as quickly and painlessly as possible. And she asks, well, why would Uncle Tim care? And this is when we learn they are married.
They're married.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm having flashbacks to high school.
Does not compute.
I'm having flashbacks to high school. I'm
sorry.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. It didn't when I was in high school either. I mean, I saw these guys who were dumb jocks, and okay, they were jocks, but they were not. Not only were they not the sharpest tool in the shed, they couldn't find the shed. But they would have all these women hanging off, or all these girls hanging off of them. And, and somebody who was a lot smarter, nothing. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's not a personal story about me, by the way. I was never a jock.
Fair enough. Neither was I.
So anyway, he says that they were married. It generally wasn't known outside the station, but she was married when she was a struggling model, and he paid for a nose job, as well as several other anatomical refinements.
Ooh, yep.
That's a kind of a polite way of saying it, I guess. And then, of course, she got the job at the station when Uncle Tim got Ed Green to hire her. And so he naturally figured that if and when she made it big, he should reap some of the benefits of that. I mean, after all he'd done for her, why not? And Elliot says, of course, she had other ideas. And then after we learn all that information, we jump to Hoops and Steele drinking beers at a country bar.
Yeah. This is what I mean about him being out of his element.
Yeah. And again, we see that she is extremely bitter. And it starts off with, at least now he won't have to risk pneumonia every time it rains. Can you imagine what Ed would have made him do if he lived where it snowed?
If it snowed. That was a good line. I thought, ooh, yeah, because we just had a crazy storm here a couple of nights ago where literally we had, have you ever heard of thunder snow?
No.
So it's when you get just an absolutely insane winter storm combined with thunder and lightning. And we had all of those. In fact, it was so destructive that just up the road from where we are, a sinkhole opened up in the street after the storm. So yeah, we got thunder snow. Yay. We don't just get snow, we get thunder snow. I don't know how you'd announce that on Spotlight News, but I can't imagine it would be pleasant.
No, it could be messy. But, as bitter as she is, at least her first comments were kind of understandable, but then she gets really personal. I mean, she says, "We'll go down as the first station in television to present Jiggle News," and says, "I have it on good authority. Chrissy's had everything enlarged except, of course, her brain. She has more surgical scars than Frankenstein. Only he has a higher IQ." Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And then, of course, this is when we find out even more information. Steele asks her why she's so hostile toward Chrissy, and Hoop says, because Ed promised me the anchor slot, and when Chrissy wiggled her way into his line of sight, and slam, bam, thank you, ma'am. I've always heard it as wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. But anyway, she got it, and Chrissy does her best work in the prone position, but she didn't have any leverage left in that department because she had already slept with Ed to get the sports assignment. So she resented Chrissy sleeping her way to the top, even though she used the same tactic herself.
Yeah, I get the impression here that this is a very dog-eat-dog sort of business for women in anchor positions, and that she's jealous that Chrissy managed to become more successful in doing the same thing that she did, that she had what Hoop does not have, which is that conventional sexiness, and has used that sort of conventional sexiness to get into a position that she wanted to be into. I don't think that Hoop would have been opposed to sleeping with Ed to get that anchor position, but in her mind, she has more integrity, so it's okay.
Yeah, because she definitely seems to have a problem with Chrissy having done it. Doesn't have a problem with her having done it, but has a problem with Chrissy having done it. It's like,
exactly.
Does not compute.
Yeah, because in her mind, and again, it's a bit of a double standard, but in her mind, because she hasn't had everything enhanced and changed and altered for her job, she still has, I guess, her integrity and her sense of self, and she sees herself as smarter and more qualified. So,
and that's probably all true.
When she slept with Ed, it was her doing what she had to do. Yeah, oh, for sure. But it's also, there's, I think, an element of jealousy on her part, that she just doesn't have that indefinable thing that Chrissy has, and there's no way of getting it because that's just kind of who she is and who Chrissy was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's jealousy. I think it's a bit of a jealousy thing, but it's also a very difficult business for women, and really, you shouldn't have a business where women are having to sleep with their boss to get a specific assignment. So yeah.
So next we jump to Laura's office back at the agency, and Steele informs the team that Chrissy slept her way to the top, and Laura says she can top that. Chrissy was married to Uncle Tim. And then Steele comments that Channel 3 is a veritable Peyton place, which is our second movie reference. And Bernice pipes up, Lana Turner, Lee Phillips, 20th Century Fox, 1957. And then, of course, when Laura and Murphy look at her with kind of stunned looks on her faces, she says, well, if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah. And then Steele gives this little, and I like Steele's little, like, he licks his finger and does an on-air point to Bernice, which is cute.
Yeah. It's nice to see Bernice getting some lines. It's a shame that there's so few, but at least she's getting something.
Yeah.
So Murphy continues on saying that everybody seems to be what they say they are and who they say they are, except Amy Fogelson. She doesn't seem to have any history going back further than 6 months when she got her job on Elliot Walsh's personal recommendation. And she didn't even fill out an application. And my head is screaming here. And it's like, does this sound familiar to anybody?
Yep.
Do we know anybody else who might not have any kind of history back beyond 6 months?
It should be ringing some bells for sure. And if it does, I don't know if Laura just sort of files this away at the moment as not being as relevant because there's characters that maybe have more of a motive at this point.
Yeah, but just simply the fact that she doesn't exist beyond 6 months and that she doesn't seem to be who she is.
Should definitely.
That should jump her up in the list of suspects, at least temporarily, until they can explain it. And they should make the connection that, this would be because either they're hiding from somebody because they're a criminal, or they're in witness protection, in which case, they would probably have a history that goes back farther than that, fake though it would be. Yeah, but something should be ringing a bell. Yeah, you're right.
True.
Anyway, so Steele muses that Amy Fogelson and Hoop Tracy shared an intense revulsion at the way the news was being exploited on Channel 3 and questions if that would be reason enough to kill a poor buffoon like Uncle Tim. And Murphy points out, hey, murders have been committed for far less logical reasons. Laura points out that Chrissy Carstairs considered her husband excess baggage and wanted to get rid of him before she moved on to bigger and better things. And Murphy reminds the gang that Uncle Tim said that if somebody was trying to kill him, he knew exactly who it was. And so
all signs point to Chrissy at this point.
Yeah. And so the discussion is coming to that conclusion. And as they're getting ready to go their way, Steele brings up a problem, which everybody knew was going to come up. Amy Fogelson is determined to unearth the truth about Remington Steele. And of course, Laura isn't pleased. She said, I knew I shouldn't have used that interview cover. That was a mistake.
I knew it was a bad idea.
Yeah. It really was. I knew that from the beginning. I like Steele's line here. He says, rather than embarrass or jeopardize her and the agency, he's prepared to do the honorable thing. And Murphy says, oh, so you're going to leave?
You're going to leave?
No, not a chance. Steele says he's going to steal her notes. And then he slaps Murphy on his injured shoulder, which the pain.
Oh, the physical comedy here from James Reed is just chef's kiss. It's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny. He hits him and he just kind of down on the... It would have hurt too, considering how hard he ran at that door.
Well, I would be surprised if he didn't have a somewhat serious injury to his shoulder that really should have been looked at by a doctor.
Yeah, probably.
Next, we jump to Christy Carstairs' apartment, and this is a bit that you mentioned earlier. Laura and Steele show up at the apartment. Chrissy answers the door in a rather short and loosely wrapped silk robe and expresses disappointment that they're not from the deli. And
well, if I were hungry, I would too, I guess.
They say they want to talk to her, and she tries to put them off, saying, well, as you mentioned, she's getting the tension pounded from her body, which is a interesting way of putting it.
Interesting way to say massage.
Well, not much of a massage.
But she could have said, I'm having a massage. Like, she didn't have to say I'm having the tension pounded from my body.
I think that's probably closer to the truth than the massage.
True. Yeah.
Anyway, Steele gives her an annoying grin, and that's when she says, well, I'm having a massage. And Steele gives her yeah, sure.
Sure you are. Yeah. Wink.
And then she, wink, wink, nod, nod. She agrees reluctantly to let them in and talk to them for just a minute. They ask her about New York, how Uncle Tim was feeling about it, if he threatened to follow her and maybe perhaps even reveal their marriage in hopes of embarrassing her with her new employers. And Laura suggests that maybe Chrissy realized she'd be better off if he were dead. And of course, Chrissy's upset because nobody's supposed to know about the New York deal. I haven't announced it yet. And it seems
also,
Laura's suggestion Yeah, I was going to say Laura's suggestion about her and Tim and the idea that Chrissy may have had a hand in his death is just too much stress for Chrissy. You're making me break out. I'm getting a zit. And what's going to happen to my credibility if I have a zit? I mean, oh.
I just love that because I don't know about you, but I have definitely watched the news and thought, that's not credible. That person has a zit.
Yes, absolutely. No, there were
very relatable experience.
This made me think of two things. One was the old Andre Agassi commercials for Canon cameras. Image is everything, style over substance. And then the old saying, beauty is skin deep, but stupid goes clear down to the bone. I think that pretty much exemplifies Chrissy.
Yeah. It does, actually. It's a perfect description of her.
So anyway, as they're talking, we hear Russell Stewart's voice from the bedroom. Chrissy Dumpling, was that the deli? And he comes out in his underwear with a towel around his neck.
So they are waiting for the deli. She's not lying.
Well, not lying.
Those blue shorts were something else.
Yeah. And Laura's lying. Mr. Stewart, investigative reporter and part-time masseur. Excuse me, I have to fold the towels.
Fold the towels, and he disappears. Smart man. He knows he's caught.
And of course, then the doorbell rings. Oh, that's the deli. Now you two must go because we only ordered enough food for two. It's like,
yeah,
brilliant. Back at the TV station, crew's apparently getting ready for another newscast, and there's a scream.
Yep.
A crew member has found Chrissy in her dressing room. She's been suffocated with a mud pack. And in investigating the scene, Laura discovers several of Chrissy's false fingernails that apparently broke off during the attack.
Yeah.
I'm not sure suffocated with a mud pack, that would be, I don't know. Could you do that?
Well, if there was enough of it and you held it over their mouth, yeah. I think it's interesting that the manner in which Elliot kills them sort of correlates to what he felt was wrong with the news. Uncle Tim kind of dies in a rather cartoonish way. He falls out of the water trough.
True.
And Chrissy, who is vapid and vain, is smothered by a mud pack.
Her makeup,
And I don't know, again, I don't think they're obviously intentional. He's obviously intending to kill these people, but I don't think he's premeditated. I don't think they're premeditated. I think, again, it's one of those, he's being pushed to the point where, and these things are seemingly happen right before the broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if it's just, he's just sort of falling into this rage almost. And I don't know. I'm just guessing, but the manner of the murders are very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Mud pack, falling out of the water trough.
Yes.
Two things that he
theatrical
was so angry about when it comes to. Yeah.
Almost the very thing
it sends a message. It definitely sends a message.
Almost the very thing he's rallying against. Anyway.
Yeah.
So after that, we see a scene where Laura is running between some buildings, and she runs around the corner of one of the buildings and is grabbed by Russell Stewart, who pulls her into an opening in the wall where he and the cameraman are standing, hiding, apparently. And of course, Stewart isn't happy for her to be there. As a matter of fact, he doesn't seem to be happy to be there at all, bemoaning the fact that he could maybe get killed. And Laura says, well,
yep.
She has some questions for him about Chrissy, and Stewart rhapsodizes, so vibrant, so alive, so giving.
So giving.
And Laura asks how long he's been receiving. And Russell tries to convince.
That's a great line.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of great little quips in this. In fact, that's one of the problems with this whole show, as far as doing notes, is there's so many great little lines that you wind up copying and pasting entire scenes into your notes.
Yeah, I may have done that later.
Anyway, Russell tries to convince Laura that no, it really wasn't what it looked like. It really was. It was a business conference. Yeah, it was a business conference. We'll call it that.
Yeah.
He says Chrissy promised to recommend him for a job.
All my business conferences take place in their underwear.
Oh, yeah. The best ones do anyway. He says that Chrissy promised to recommend him for a job at the network as a special assignment reporter. And they were discussing what film she should show them to demonstrate where his talents lie.
I don't know that any of those films are appropriate to be shown on TV.
Yeah, a lot of lying going about, and I don't just mean by what they say either. Yeah. Laura asks if Uncle Tim knew about the business relationship between them, and Tim says, well, yeah, he could have. I mean, Chrissy's not exactly known for keeping her mouth shut. And when Laura suggests that maybe Tim found out about the relationship and Chrissy's plans to leave him and take Russell to New York, that might have been a reason to get Tim out of the picture. Russell counters that, well, while that may have been an excellent reason to dispose of Uncle Tim, it wasn't for Chrissy because she was his ticket out of this 2-bit station, as he calls it.
Yeah.
And killing her wouldn't help that plan. And he's certain that somebody's trying to wipe out the entire Spotlight news team. Well, he's not wrong. And even suggests that maybe it's the people he's getting ready to expose. And just then a pimp rolls up in his...
bizarre because he's purple pimp mobile.
I mean, it's ridiculously pimped out.
He keeps calling him oh, it's so pimped out. He keeps calling him a flesh peddler. And I wonder, did standards and practices not want them to use the word pimp? Or was this more just jingo?
That's a good question. I don't know. They might not have wanted him to use that word. That would be my guess. Yeah. It's just a guess, but that would be what I would guess. But yeah, they definitely picked an interesting term. Flesh peddler. Same thing, basically. But
yeah.
Anyway, did you recognize who the pimp is?
He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. He's very tall, though. I feel like
you ever see the show Night Court?
Should be very.
Bull Shannon.
That's him?
Bull Shannon, yeah.
I used to
except
love that
Bull
show.
Shannon was bald, but this guy's got a full head of hair.
Yeah, that must be what threw me off. Because I love that show. He was one of my favorite characters too.
But yeah, so he rolls up in this ridiculously pimped out Cadillac convertible, and notice,
I love it.
It's the cameraman who leads the way from the hiding place to confront the pimp.
Yeah,
with Russell following behind, bravely using Laura as a shield. Can this... this guy is getting worse and worse the more I see of him.
He's just so gross. He's so repugnant.
And Russell sort of confronts the police officer who's there accepting a bribe, and the officer attacks the cameraman.
He shoves Laura in front of him.
Yeah, he shoves Laura in front of him, and he takes off running. And of course, the cameraman tries to follow.
Yeah.
And
he gives her the microphone.
Yeah. Laura's standing there holding the microphone, and everybody's running off and leaving her with this angry, big monster of a guy. And then, of course, just as he's ready to grab Laura, the cable from the camera that's connected to the mic jerks her out of his grasp. And then, of course, a mad chase ensues with Russell and Stewart and the cameraman basically abandoning Laura. It's only through her amazing running efforts in her shoes that she can keep up.
In heels?
Yes.
Yep.
And at one point she's trapped and manages to get away by throwing old clothes at the guy. So.
Yeah. This is a good scene, and she really uses her wits.
The three of them run into a cafe where Stewart seems to be having a nervous breakdown. And he says, this is the line. He's a fraud, a charlatan, and a con man. And it comes up yet again. So keep that pin in it. And Laura doesn't disagree. It's almost like,
and the poor cameraman.
Yeah.
The cameraman's he's in the background checking his camera for damage. And Laura's comment, if I had my gun, I would put you out of your misery, which is hilarious because they never have the gun.
Yeah.
It's never there.
I had that on there. Yeah. Yeah. He must have really gotten on her bad side for her to threaten something like that, because that's not normally how she would respond to somebody. But he admits that Amy does all the research.
Usually, no.
Yeah. Well, yeah. He admits that Amy does all the research, writes all the questions, picks the people he's supposed to interview, and that he doesn't even know who many of them are. He says he's tired of always being afraid. He wants to get somewhere where it's safe, where people don't threaten him or hit him or try and run over him. And that's when Laura says the line, "If I had my gun, I'd put you out of your misery."
Put you out of your misery. And I feel sorry again for the cameraman who is obviously doing this on a regular basis. And he's like Fred, where nobody thinks of him. Mm-hmm. It's just in the background.
Yeah. So Stewart says that all he wants is that anchor spot that's going to open up as soon as they get rid of Elliot. And she's shocked. And he says, "It's a young man's game. I don't care how many toupees Elliot wears. He's not fooling anybody. He's old." And now she's angry. I mean, she was shocked when she heard he was going to be fired. Now she's angry and she defends him. "What about all the years he's put in strengthening his talents, honing his skills? He still has a great deal to offer." And Stewart says, "Well, maybe he can read the newspapers to the retirees at the old folks' home." After which Laura does something that I think is out of character.
What a complete jerk.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so in that context, you can understand Laura's action, but it seems to me a little out of character when she picks up a pitcher of creamer and dumps it on his head. I don't know. To me, that just feels like it's just for the gag.
See, and this is okay. So I had something like this in my notes, but it wasn't that it's out of character for Laura. I just don't like this is a trope that you see in TV all the time where somebody pours something over somebody's head because they're mad. And that person usually just sits there. And that's the gag. Yeah. They sit there as the ketchup or the whatever, pour over their head and they look silly. And this is the part that I think doesn't make it work for me, because a normal human being would be like, "What are you doing?" And they'd move or they'd jump back or something like that. So I feel like the gag, I don't think it's out of character for her to dump something over his head. She's mad, but it does feel like a bit of a silly gag to have him just sit there and it's like wah wah as the camera sort of zooms in on his face. So I think it would have been made more sense for her to like stomp off and have him just be like trying to get out of his hair.
and worse about it is the fact that he sits there perfectly still, but even the expression on his face doesn't change.
Yeah.
And it's not like he does something where it's like, "What?"
Yeah.
You know, he's taken by surprise. Maybe he doesn't move, but there's some sort of expression on his face. It's just, okay, we're in the 1930 or 1920s, 1910s, whatever. We're going to take a picture of you. You have to remain motionless for 3 minutes. Yeah. That, and maybe that's part of the reason why it just felt wrong to me, is because it just doesn't feel right. It's wrong. And that could be the reason.
It's turned into a gag.
Yeah. Anyway, next we jump to the studio, and Amy Fogelson is at the news desk reading the questions that are apparently going to be part of an investigation that she's writing for Stewart of a congressman. Steele comes out of the shadows and compliments her on the questions, and she responds by saying, "Yeah, you think those are good questions? Just wait till you get the ones that Stewart's going to ask you." And this begins a back and forth between the two of them that's interesting. It leads to an interesting place. And Steele says,
this is again one of those examples of him confessing something intimate to a side character, something that he otherwise couldn't say to Laura or isn't ready yet to say to Laura, but it gives us some insight into who he is, which I like.
Yes. And that was something that I thought of, and I've got it in my notes later on at the end of this. Kind of the same thing is he's admitting something to somebody that he's not going to see again, and he knows it's not going to get back to anybody.
Yeah.
And he says, "Well,
it's still a risk though, because she's an investigative journalist. It's still a risk."
But maybe he's relying on the fact that they know that there's a problem with her past as well. And he's hoping for a sort of a mutual destruction type thing. But also maybe that he figures, well, a little bit of the truth at this point may solve some problems later on. I don't know.
Yeah. This moment, when he says this, he gives this story. It's absent of the usual theatrics and histrionics that he generally employs when he talks about himself. He's obviously, and this might be similar to Laura and Elliot. What he says to her is heartfelt. It's emotional. She is a stranger, but someone that could use this information against him. I think it's more evidence that he reads people really well, and he can see that Amy Fogelson is a kindred spirit, right? He maybe can tell that she has been dealt a crappy hand also. And
Could
like
be.
you said, there's a bit of mutual destruction in there, that he knows that there's an issue with her own past, but he opens up a lot to her about, and this is like, if we didn't know any spoilers, this is the first time we get real background as to who he is and what he's been through.
Yeah.
So
it's and the lead
a
up
really
to that,
beautiful little moment.
It is. And the lead up to that story is something I wanted to hit as well, because he says, it seems we both have minor discrepancies in our past. For example, you didn't exist till 6 months ago. And she says, well, you don't exist at all. You don't have a birth certificate. You have tax returns, no fingerprints on file anywhere. And he says,
tax returns.
I know it. It's always coming back to those tax returns.
It's going to be relevant later.
And he says, look, 2 people have been murdered. Why are you so consumed with Remington Steele? And she says, I believe him to be a fraud, a charlatan, and a con man. That phrase keeps coming up. Stewart said it twice about himself. And now she's saying it about Steele. I think she is the brains, not just behind Stewart, but I think she's the brains behind this whole news department at this point, because she's obviously, Stewart didn't come up with this line on his own. There's no way. He's not that smart.
No, he didn't.
And
no, he's like Chrissy.
yeah. So it's
he's a pretty face, but there's not much behind it.
It's a line that just keeps coming up. And this is when he gets into that story about his background. And and when he starts telling it in the what is it? Was it the second person or the third person? No, the third person. So it's like he's talking about somebody else.
Yeah, a story.
He doesn't really totally change it to first person, but it very quickly you recognize that it is a first person story. He is talking about himself. And even if he doesn't acknowledge verbally that it's about himself, he is acknowledging it in a way. And then that's where I have my line here. He's honest with those who he will never see again. And it's, this is, you know what? This is such an important story. I think I'm going to put the audio clip in.
Yeah.
And you're a young man once, virtually an orphan, shunted from relative to relative, always underfoot and unwanted. He'd been given many names as a child, sometimes to suit the vanity of those who sheltered him, others to bilk the government with one more dependent. He never really knew who he was or where he belonged, so he set out at an early age to find something he could call his own, something he could hang on to when the nights turned bitter and the faces unfriendly. And as he'd been taught by his elders, he acquired many names in that pursuit and many professions to go with them. He saw a great deal of the world, mostly from the underside. Cheap lofts, drafty street corners. He's still searching, Miss Fogelson, merely from a better perch. If you can find that young man in any of your notes, he'd greatly appreciate it.
This story gives us more about Steele's background than I think, not only than we've gotten up to this point, but I think that this one story gives us more condensed information about him than we get in the entire series. I mean, we get other bits and pieces later on.
Yeah, it's good. And it's beautifully written.
It is. It's and it's well delivered.
Oh my God, so well delivered. Like he makes it believable that, because Steele for the most part is a bit clownish in this season, and he goes from clownish to delivering this very serious monologue about himself and about his past, and we believe that he can be clownish, but he can also be very, there's a pathos to this that is just, it tugs at your heartstrings without being cloying or overly cheesy, which is hard to do, I think, especially in the 80s. I think they defaulted to cheesy more often than not. So it's really good.
Well, and it's obvious that the story, the story resonates with us. I mean, we can see that with his character, that this is a sincere, heartfelt drudged up from the depths story. And it affects Amy as well. Now, she isn't totally going to let that deter her, but it does have an effect, because as Steele is turning to leave, she volunteers information. I don't think she would have otherwise. And this goes back to your earlier thing about why would he do this? Because she volunteers that on the day Chrissy was killed, she heard Chrissy arguing with Hoops Tracy. She doesn't know what it was about, but it was threatening and violent. And I don't think he would have gotten that if it wasn't for the story. I don't think he did that to get her information. No. I think he did that to connect with her.
No, I don't think so either.
But
yeah, he gives up a piece of himself.
And so she gives in return. So
very willingly.
Yeah. And Steele thanks her very softly. He thanks her for the information. And it's
so good.
Yeah.
It's so good.
And again, as I said, the story isn't going to deter her. She warns Steele that while his story was, as she says, very affecting, doesn't mean the hunt's over. And he says, for either side.
Yeah.
My question.
Yeah.
His hunt.
I like that.
About the truth, or his hunt for the truth, just about Amy, or for himself as well? I know that's, I think
both. I think definitely both.
That's a pretentious question, but I really think that there's elements of,
no, I think it's a good question,
because he from his story, he's still searching for himself, but he's also searching for the truth about Amy Fogelson because she is a suspect in this story. So I think that one's layered with several meanings. Back at the Golden Lady Ballroom, Elliot Walsh is at a table.
Yep.
He still has his toupee on, which presumably was from the earlier newscast. He pulls a bottle and a paper bag from his jacket. And of course, as he does, Laura comes to the table and he invites her to sit down and join him. That is, that he gives an excuse about it. He says, it's a game we play. They don't permit alcohol in here. So from time to time, I smuggle in a bottle. They bring me a pot of tea and I pretend, or we all pretend that I'm getting smashed on orange pico.
I'm getting.
I think there's more to it than that. First of all, carrying a bottle in your jacket is not something that a normal person would do. That's something that a person who is either an alcoholic or well on their way to becoming an alcoholic would do. And to bring it around to something you said earlier, which I hadn't thought of prior to this, is the fact that maybe he is self-medicating because, as we discussed, he is out of control. He's doing things that are repugnant to him, but he's doing them and he doesn't know how to deal with it. He doesn't know how to stop it. And by self-medicating with alcohol, maybe it will deaden the guilt he's feeling about what he's doing. Maybe he thinks it'll help him get a little bit of control back or something. I don't know.
I think his actions are weighing heavily on him at this point. He's not, when Laura went in to see him in the other scene, he was charming. He was funny. He was, despite the fact that he killed somebody, he didn't seem to be as weighed down with anger. And this anger that he's holding back, it slips out here. He calls it a mercy killing. And that's an interesting phrase because he might be revealing how he sees his actions, an act of mercy for a higher cause. He doesn't feel good about what he's doing. But when Laura asks whether he's worried he'll be next, he says, in truth, I would welcome it. Oof.
Yeah. It's, when he says the line about any idea who the mercy killer is, he tries to say it lightly, jokingly, but this is definitely a different tone of conversation than their earlier ones.
It is very different. And Laura senses that. You can see in her face that she's still trying to see him as a hero. She's still trying to see him as a good man. She's trying to convince him he's done good work. She keeps reminding him of it. And yet he's just not able to see it anymore. He's not capable of that. He's revealing the truth of his feelings.
He asks Laura, do you have heroes? And she says, she's looking at one of them and he says, heroes are important. They give you something to strive for. And he makes a couple of references, and he makes one to tell the truth like Ed Morrow. And when Laura assures him that, yeah, he has been a hero like that, he says, and what has it gotten me? I'm a trained SEAL, honking and clapping for my lousy portion of fish. I hide under some Sicilian peasant's crowning glory, stab myself with corsets, and pretend to give serious consideration to whether Princess Di is pregnant again. And then the next line, while Chrissy Carstairs, every teenager's midnight fantasy, whose head has never held a single solitary thought, is summoned to New York to read the news at $600,000 per.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. He is looking at what he has gotten out of being this hero, as Laura describes him. And he's seeing that nobody respects heroes. Nobody respects people who go out and do the things that nobody else wants to do. They'll take the benefit from it. Yeah. They'll say, great, I like this result, but you, the guy that actually did the work, you, the lady who actually did the work, who got down there and got dirty and did it, you're nothing. Go away. You're bothering me.
Which is something Laura has been living for this, that like Laura, that's what's going on. That's what's been going on. She's the one doing all the work. Steele is the one getting all the attention. And if we're going to use the same metaphor, Steele is Chrissy Carstairs.
Out of my head.
Maybe that's Steele jiggling onto the but maybe that's why it's such a I think I broke him, everyone. Maybe that's why it's such an injustice, and why Laura connects so deeply with him and wants to reassure him that he has done good work, because in a way it's almost like she's able to reassure herself that what she's doing matters, because sometimes it doesn't feel like it does. Because you can see Stephanie's face is so expressive here. She looks irritated with him, angry that he can't see what she can. And then when he asks her if she's ever thought about growing old, she says, not really. Right? And he says, don't do it. It's a very demeaning process. The first thing isn't to go, it's your hair, it's your courage. And that's just, it's such a deeply felt moment for her, I think.
Yeah. I mean, this is a great exchange. It's well written. It's well acted.
Yeah.
It's very emotional. And then Laura, she has to ask about Amy. What's her background? Where did she come from? How did he meet her? And obviously he understands that Laura is looking at her as a possible suspect. And he says, no, just if you have any respect for me at all,
leave her alone.
Just accept what I'm going to tell you here. Leave her alone. She's the only decent one down there. She's got plenty of history, but it's not for public information. Just leave her alone. And he's obviously, he's connected with her emotionally. So,
and it's interesting because most people would think if he's a murderer, he'd welcome anybody else getting the blame for what he's done, because it means he doesn't get caught. But in this case, he's fine diverting Laura with telling her information about Uncle Tim's marriage and Chrissy, etc. But the minute she starts to zero in on somebody that he actually respects, that's again, that goes against his moral code. Nope, leave her alone. She doesn't have any part of this.
Yeah.
So it just, such a good, those two scenes back to back too. Like,
yeah, in some ways they're almost, I was going to say they're almost parallel. They're almost bookends in a way. Because they're both people revealing things about themselves to somebody. One, and both of them are in danger by their revelations.
Yes.
So, anyway, next we see Steele and Hoops are at her home out on her driveway playing basketball. And they exchange some pleasantries.
Yeah.
And then Steele asks if she has some other less sporting name. And then we find out her name is actually Margaret.
Yeah.
But Margaret didn't pay the bills. Steele asks about the last time she saw Chrissy. And when she says, well, it was before you and I went to that country bar the day before she got killed. He shoots down her story and says, no, sorry. Someone heard you and Chrissy having a violent argument on the day she died. She almost seems ready to deny it. It's, who said that? Who said that?
Yeah.
As if, well, depending on who it was, I might be able to discredit that person. But, she gives up on that and then admits that, yeah, it's true. She'd asked Chrissy to put in a good word for her with Ed to be the second anchor. But as she put it, Chrissy got on her high horse saying that she had to earn the job like Chrissy did on merit.
On merit. Which is hilarious considering they both use the same quote unquote merit to get into their positions, right?
But apparently some merits are more equal than others. When Steele points out that
Chrissy did have hers enhanced.
Yes, that's true. When Steele points out that Margaret had asked Steele if anyone would notice if she had Chrissy put to sleep, Margaret says, well, yeah, maybe she had reason to kill Chrissy, but why would she kill Uncle Tim? She didn't have a reason to do that. And Steele agrees that she has a point, provided, and this is something that's not come up yet in the discussion.
It's the same person.
Yeah, provided it's the same person who killed them both. And he's at least throwing out the suggestion, which probably should have been brought up earlier, that maybe they're not being done by the same person. I mean, there's a fair assumption that it is, but you do have to consider these things anyway.
Yeah.
Next, we're back at the TV station, and we're in the back offices, and A.B. Fogelson is at her desk typing. Laura and Steele walk in, holding a folded piece of paper. And Amy says, I hope you can think on your feet, Mr. Steele. These are the questions that Russell's going to ask you tonight. But Steele and Laura aren't there about their upcoming interview. They've got a story that Amy might be interested in. It's the story of someone who planted incriminating documents on a congressman she suspected of taking kickbacks and then ran the newspaper story for the paper she worked for. And of course, they say that the allegations did prove true, but Agnes Fowley was fired from the paper from her unethical behavior. And Laura says, well, I'm sure you're painfully familiar with the details, Miss Fowley.
Yeah.
And she says, yeah, she's been
busted.
Yeah, she's been waiting for 6 months for the other shoe to drop, and here it is with a great big thud. And she tells the story about how she couldn't get a newspaper job, even delivering them, to save her life. And she finally came to see Elliot. And although he disapproved of my methods, he understood my motives, is what she says. And so he interceded with Ed Green on her behalf.
Yeah.
Laura points out that someone with such a fervent desire to punish the guilty, no matter what the cost, just might see Spotlight News as the ultimate corruption and want to put an end to it permanently.
Yep. And she's right, just wrong person.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Right motive, wrong target. And she says, look, I'm not going to hide the fact from you that I did all these things. You're right. I did all these things. I'm everything you say I am, except I'm not a murderer. And she asks what they're going to do with the information. And Steele begins making an unspoken bargain with her. There's no sense in exposing someone for their past indiscretions. And she reaches down, grabs an envelope, and hands it to Steele, or holds it out while Steele holds out the paper. And they each kind of, like two scorpions getting ready to go at each other. They each hesitate, and then they snatch the contents out of the other person's hand. And then after a beat, Steele gives her a look. And then
he makes her take the sheet out of the
That's right. He gives her a look and points to the sheet, the typewriter, and she rips the page out from it and hands it to him. And then she says a line that Laura catches but doesn't comment on. I hope that kid finds himself.
Yeah.
And Steele replies, he's never stopped trying. And Laura, obviously, she recognizes that there's something there's something that you guys are talking about that I have no clue about, but she doesn't say anything. She's curious, but she doesn't say anything about it, at least not right then.
Yeah.
And then we jump to the station news set. Murphy walks in complaining about how he dislikes the part of the job that has him delivering autopsy reports.
Autopsy reports.
And I have a note here. The original story, like I said earlier, was written by Fred Lyle and Duncan Smith. Michael Gleason participated in the writing of the script. I'm wondering, did Michael Gleason include this line, or maybe it was one of the other writers, based on what we discussed previously about James Reed's frustration about how his character had been reduced to basically an extra? You think?
That's an interesting thought. I never considered it.
I mean, because it fits so well.
I mean, we've seen Murphy. Yeah, we've definitely seen Murphy being reduced to getting the autopsy reports in past episodes. And he does mention it again in, I think it's Steele's Gold, when he kind of loses his mind a bit. But yeah, there definitely does seem to be an expression of frustration with his own position, and could definitely have been something that James Reed spoke of, or could just be that it tracks with his character, maybe both. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that part of it.
Yeah. It seemed to be, we're late enough into the season that certainly the production team, Michael Gleason and everybody else, was aware of James Reed's frustration. And
yeah, well, I would be too if I was one of the main characters and was barely ever on screen.
Yeah. And it just, that line just happens to fit that scenario so well, particularly at this time of the season. So
yeah,
it was just a thought that came to mind. Anyway, Laura reads aloud from the report, mentioning that the report shows that there was blood under the broken fingernails from Chrissy. And she editorializes about how Chrissy must have put up a struggle. And of course, Steele summarizes that, well, apparently she managed to inflict a substantial wound on her killer. And Murphy rebuts his conclusion by pointing out that there's nobody walking around with scratches or Band-Aids. And then Steele kind of jokingly says, unless it's on a portion of the anatomy we don't normally see. And the
two of them laugh together. Like there's a little bit of a moment here.
Yeah. And Murphy says, well, he doubts the killer suffocated Chrissy in the buff. And that Steele is thinking about Russell Stewart and coming out of Chrissy's room. And of course, as those two are engaged in the exchange and they're laughing, we see that stunned look comes over Laura's face whenever Steele inadvertently says the thing that brings it all together.
Yeah.
And she turns and looks at him with that semi-blank look that she does so well. It's
I can't believe it.
You really are incredible. And Murphy, of course, can't believe it. Oh, come on, Laura. Don't tell me he's come up with the solution again.
Not again.
And of course, after Laura says, yeah, he did it again, Murphy asks Steele. And this is interesting because Murphy asks Steele to share his brilliant deduction with a fellow detective. And of course, Steele says, come on, Murphy, these things are always more fun when there's an audience to guess along. And then he slaps Murphy on the shoulder. And again, Murphy just howls in pain.
Oh.
But that line, care to share your deduction with a fellow detective, I think this is the first time that Murphy acknowledges Steele as a detective, although he probably didn't intend to do that. But
no, it was partly sarcastic, but definitely it was there. And then Steele's, it's always more fun with the audience to guess along. He might as well turn and winked to the rest of us, because that was definitely a comment to the audience.
Yeah. But it's just that line from Murphy's. I just realized that was, as I was taking my notes, I realized that was probably the first time that he's ever really truly acknowledged Remington Steele as being a detective, or having reached the level where he could be considered a detective. So I thought that was an interesting line. Well, next we're at the news studio, and the evening news is starting, and the new news team is Biff Lagerfield replacing Hoops Tracy on sports, Cousin Claude replacing Uncle Tim with the weather. Oh, come on with the names. Come on. Russell Stewart is still the investigative reporter. Goofy. Although I'll put the investigative reporter as being now new and improved with sarcasm quotes around it.
Yeah.
Because the only thing he could investigate is how to fold towels. Elliot Walsh is still the lead anchor. And now Margaret Tracy is the new second anchor. The team's seated. Elliot begins reading the first story about the death of Chrissy Carstairs. how the autopsy revealed blood under her fingernails, indicating that she had managed to inflict deep lacerations on her assailant. And then he reads, and I checked the teleprompter, and the rest, almost everything else that follows is on the teleprompter, where he reads, the killer was obviously driven by some deep-seated need to express his rage at the loss of heroes. And
just his delivery.
He sees Laura and standing over by a second teleprompter. And despite realizing that what he is about to read is his confession on the air, he continues.
Yeah.
And he says, and again, this is all on the teleprompter. The killer began by trying to embarrass those he felt who were trivializing the news, but his anger soon pushed him beyond protest into the dark corners of murder. And this is where he goes off the teleprompter and says that after doing the newscasts for more years than he cares to remember, this is going to be his last one. And he reaches up, takes the toupee off his head, and we see the scratches from back to front across his scalp. And Steele slips away into the control room. And I don't think Laura saw that. He just did it. And in the control room, Green is ordering the video feed cut, saying that they got to go to a commercial. But Steele intervenes, demanding that they let him speak.
Yeah.
Walsh continues with a scathing vilification of Spotlight News. He describes television as a magical tool of light and sound, an instrument that can help create the most informed people in the world's most enlightened republic. But instead, he says, we give you Spotlight News. We put on happy faces and happy talk. We serve up wars and disasters like mealtime snacks. And he denounces Spotlight News as not just a local disgrace, but a national affliction. And he pauses his tirade and then makes an acknowledgement of Laura and her. I wrote down admiration because I couldn't think of any other term. But that's really not the right term. But obviously, he has developed a strong relationship and feeling for her. And I think she has been his lifeline in a sense, bringing him back from where he's been. And he says that
I think so too.
He says that a young lady he's become fond of has reminded him of something that he once said about a good reporter giving the facts and a great reporter understanding their meaning. He says he won't claim any greatness. He'll just simply give the facts. And he says, those of us who sit in these well-salaried seats are not the news. We're not the news. Forget the polished smiles, the scripted banter, and our pretty faces. We are not the news. The news is unexpected, hard, ugly, and complex. And as he's saying all this, of course, Laura begins crying and Murphy puts his arm around her.
She lets him comfort her. And that, I had that in my notes, that it's a very interesting moment because Steele, both of these men do something for her that she needs. Steele slips away to make sure that this doesn't get cut, that he's able to express what he needs to express. And in a way, he's talking to her too. And Murphy puts his arm around her. And this is one of the few times we see Laura cry. We don't really see her cry on this show very often. I think I can think of maybe one other time. And this is the crack in her armor. This is an impassioned speech from a man who has lost everything. And when he looks at her that first time, he gives her this, she looks back. She looks back at him defiantly, but also kind of heartbroken. And it's interesting that he knew instinctively what Laura needed to hear and what he needed to say. And like the camera work is great. It's excellent. It cuts to these others taking in his confession, the looks that range from horrified to heartbroken. And Amy in particular looks especially let down. And it's just like, when he says the news is unexpected, it's hard and ugly, and most of all, it's complex. This feels to me like the most significant part because it pretty much describes what has happened in this episode. He's not a mustache-twirling villain, but he's not a good person. He's killed 2 people. He is a murderer. And yet we feel for him despite everything. Laura feels for him. We like him. What he did is horrific, and yet we understand that it's not black and white. Like the news and what he did, it's hard to understand. It is ugly and it is complex. And then he says, Don't settle for us. You're better than that. You deserve better. And holy hell, can J.D. Cannon deliver a speech? Like, just all of it is incredible.
And when Laura starts crying, you said that it's because she's seen her hero who has crumbled. I think there's more to it than that, though, because I don't disagree with anything you said. I think it's absolutely 100% correct. But I think it's also the fact that she was one of the people that helped bring him down. She didn't cause him to commit the murders, but she was one of the ones who helped bring it out that he was a failed hero. He was a fallen hero. And
I think she is all of his vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I think she is feeling as much pain about having done what she did, despite the fact that she knew she had to, despite the fact that she had no choice in the matter.
Yeah.
But just because you do something that you know you have to, it's like when you have your kids and you have to discipline them or you have to disappoint them about something. You don't want to do it, but you know you have to for their best interest.
Yeah.
You know, it's that pain of
crumple and you just feel terrible.
Exactly. And I think that is part of what she's feeling here is that she had to do it, but that doesn't mean she feels good about it.
No.
But anyway,
I agree.
His image fades from the monitor, and then we move to the Golden Lady Ballroom. Laura and Remington are dancing to a mellow big band tune. And I have, I think, a musical edit here that does not show up on Krebby's list of edited steals. Because both the script and the transcript that I get from the website shows that the song that's playing in the background is As Time Goes By. But if you listen to what little bit of the music we can distinctly hear, it's not As Time Goes By.
Yeah.
So
no, it isn't. Yeah.
I think that's an edit that needs to show up somewhere. But yeah, it's as best as I can tell, it's probably just a stock big band sounding track from somebody's musical library somewhere. But it's definitely not the song that is referenced. So anyway, as they're dancing, they're talking, and Steele is somewhat befuddled. He says, I realize my powers of deduction have sharpened considerably under your tutelage, but exactly how did I solve this one? And she says, well,
you want to tell me? You want to fill me in?
I'm a genius. I'm brilliant. Here. What did I do? And Laura says, well, when you said the scratches were probably on a portion of the killer's anatomy we don't normally see, but we always saw Elliot without his toupee. Exactly. He hated the toupee. It represented everything he'd grown to despise about himself. But she remembered that he wore it the last time that she saw him at the ballroom. He had to wear it.
Yeah.
And Steele expresses his condolences
and in a sense, it trapped him.
Yeah. It's one of those, as the old saying goes, damned if you do, damned if you don't. The fact that he wore it was out of character, and that was evidence. That was a clue.
Yeah.
But if he hadn't, of course, it would have been a clue as well. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So Remington expresses his condolences about the man who had once been one of Laura's idols, and she says he's a fallen idol, but he tries to restore some of her admiration for the man by reminding her that in the end, he managed to get back on his feet.
Yeah. And he's right. He didn't run. He didn't lash out. He didn't attack anybody. He delivered a confession willingly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's something to be said for somebody who makes a mistake. Okay. This is a huge mistake, who does something wrong.
Oh,
even if, and it's not just somebody does something wrong and they don't realize it and they realize it after the fact, but even somebody who does something wrong, knowing it's wrong as they're doing it, but regrets it. And at least later has the courage of at least owning up to it. There's something to be said for that. That does show some character.
I think admitting it was a relief for him.
Mm-hmm.
He was finally able to just, whatever the consequences are, and obviously he would face jail time for that. He was done pretending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, after he says that to her, Laura asks him about the exchange between himself and Amy about hoping the kid finds himself. And Steele says, it's a poor waif wandering the cold, cruel world in search of himself. She asks, anybody I know?
Goes back to his...
back to his kind of casual, lighthearted. Oh, it's nothing important. And she says, anyone I know? And he says, slightly, but with a little luck, you'll know him far more intimately. And there we go. That's the episode. I'm sorry. This was a tough one to get through.
I think, well, I think it was an important episode, though, because we get so much here that it was obviously going to be a little longer than some of the others. But I think this last line is also interesting because it's played as innuendo, but it also comes across as a promise. He's not ready to share his story yet, but someday he will. So, sweet little bookend to what's otherwise a very heavy episode.
And you're correct in that it does have a little bit of innuendo into it, but really, I didn't read it that way. Primarily, I read that more as the promise.
No, me either.
So, anyway, like I said, tough episode to get through, especially at points. Website, www.SteeleWatching.com has show notes. We'll have links to Amazon's listings for Foreign Correspondent and the Peyton's Place. The Peyton's Place?
Yeah. No, I think it's just Peyton's Place.
To Peyton Place. Hey, who's Peyton? No, it'll have links to Peyton Place, the movie, and Foreign Correspondent, and links to some other resources such as
the Instagram, Twitter, and Steele Watchers Facebook or Steele Watching Facebook page, but also the Steele Watchers Facebook group where we hang out, we share pics, we share videos, we just talk about various parts of the show, and overall have a pretty good time. So people should to join us and follow those other social media pages.
Yes. Join us.
That's my plug.
And also join us for the next episode, which is Vintage Steele.
Vintage Steele.
Yes.
Dun, dun, dun. The one we've all been waiting for.
Yes, and this one's going to be yours. So there we go.
I'm not intimidated at all by one of the biggest fan favorite episodes of the series. No, we're fine. We're fine.
Well, be honest with you.
It's great.
I'm glad that you get this one because I think sometimes I think sometimes the podcast episodes go better when you're leading them than when I'm leading them. But anyway, well,
I don't necessarily think that's true.
Anyway,
I think they go down more tangents and rabbit holes.
Anyway, hey, thanks everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.